Yeah, hi. So I'm Linda. Thank you so much, Kyla, and thanks for inviting me. I had the chance to make a series of pieces for Benzie Conservation District, I guess last spring and summer. And so that has led to a fun collaboration with Kyla and also, um, you know, uh, I made these things. I'll show them to you later. But Kyle expressed interest in how and why I make these pieces. And thank you all for joining me while I talk about what I do. So I'm actually really excited about sharing this particular part of my work. I'm an artist who I live in Ontario, Canada. I work in my home studio here. I have been doing this for about 15 years. But over the last maybe 5 years, my work has become more and more sort of detailed and botanical with botanical accuracy. And I'm starting to use my work as for education purposes. So it's pretty neat to get involved with someone like Kyla, who is coming at this from a totally other side. So I'm going to share with you some of my things. So here are just a few that I've made recently for Invasive Species Center. You've probably seen my work maybe online, maybe at Benzie. So, but I'll be sharing a bunch of my work, and then afterwards I will show you some three-dimensional pieces that I have here, and then I'll answer any questions that you might have. So please feel free to put questions in the chat, and Kyle is going to help me at the end, and we'll organize people's questions and try and answer everything as we go. Okay, so here's my studio. I'm not in my studio today. I'm in my living room because it's cold and we're at minus 14 here, I think. And so my studio is only really good until about -1, -2, and then I need to move inside. So unfortunately not in, but this is what it looks like today. It's messy. I didn't clean it up for the picture. I've got all my papers there and my desk and my tools. I love to make a mess. This helps me be creative. My husband also works in the studio too, and he's been helping me with a bunch of projects as well. So that's his space on the other side. Okay, so I've been, yeah, like I said, I've been doing this for about 15 years. I started out a long time ago making giant paper flowers for sort of trade show type displays. I've always been really into plants and flowers. I was working at a flower farm at the time. I have a big garden, and I started to want to make them out of paper. It was just an idea that I had, and I made these big flowers, but they ended up being too big. So I started to move more towards realistic sizes after that. I have a degree in visual arts from York University here in Toronto. I studied drawing and painting, but also sculpture and installation art. So I've always kind of been interested in like more immersive sculptural things. And that's where that sort of started. Okay, so my first piece that I made in a shadow box, so how I present my work is in shadow boxes usually. I do this for a number of reasons and I'll explain as I go, but a number of years ago, I saw an exhibit here in Ottawa called The Art of the Plant. It was in the Museum of Nature, and it was an exhibit of beautiful botanical art, botanical drawings and paintings. And I was just so taken by the presentation and the sort of respect and honor given to each plant in the composition. I just suddenly realized that's how I wanted to present my work. And so this is the first one that I did like that. A Centaurea montana, not a native plant, but I put it in a shadow box. I put that scientific name under it and it suddenly just clicked. This is how I want to do it. So I posted that to my Instagram and the Museum of Nature shared it. And so this made me think, okay, this is actually the way to go for me. So I just wanted to put that in there to show you where I started from. I love doing things with tiny details. So, and small, fine cutting is really key for me. So that actually was something I was doing back then too. Okay, so here I am, another cold day working in the living room. Um, but I wanted to show you this because um, it shows you a little bit about my inspiration and my process. So we own a piece of land near here. We're really lucky to have a spot. It's 6 acres. There's a cabin on it. It's on the river. And so we go there all the time. When we first got this land, I started to catalog all the wildflowers that were there. And I made my own herbarium. So if you haven't done this, it's the greatest project ever. You just press the flowers as they come into bloom, or the plants. And it's a great way to learn your plants and what's in your own backyard. So I did this. It's got 100 or more pages. There's hundreds of species in there, which is amazing, but it's a place that has a lot of different ecosystems. So there's lots of different plants there. And doing this project, I started to learn about invasive species more than I knew already, and think about what was going on in terms of the relationship between the plants and with disturbed areas, etc. And as part of that project, then I started to make these plants out of paper. So here are, this is my paper, I call it my paper herbarium. It was a collection of more than 50 wildflowers, all inspired by those plants that I had pressed. And I put them all into little shadow boxes. They're 6 by 9 inches. And so it doesn't capture the whole plant. They're quite small actually, but it captures enough. And I displayed them all together. And I've used the background colors to indicate native and non-native. So gray is the non-native. They're not necessarily invasive, but it was just something that got me thinking about the teaching power of these things. So here is a picture of all the plants I made all together. I'm going to exhibit these again next month here in town. And doing this project really taught me a lot about how people interact with wild plants and the emotional connections they have with those plants, but also just that we don't know very much about what is non-native, but also how where the plants grow and how they interact with each other. So this was a really interesting project from that perspective. This is a personal project. Nobody paid me to do this, although I would love to do another one paid if anyone's interested. But I also do a lot of private commissions too. So one memorable, oh, sorry, we're going to go back and talk about this a little more. Here are, just because these are aquatics that were in that project. You can see iris, marsh marigold, there's the pickerel weed. I've always really been interested in aquatics. So even I think I did this 6 years ago. I was already really interested in it. Here's another box from that project that shows a bunch of species all together. I love doing this kind of thing, and Kyla's project also involved species together in a box, which was awesome because they interact with one another in the space, and I find that really interesting. So here's just a bunch of beloved wetland plants all together. Yeah, and here is that project, my paper herbarium in a gallery setting. I had a few shows with this project, and it was really interesting to see these wild plants in this extremely formal and yeah, stark space. So I just thought you might think that was interesting too. Just bringing the outside in, kind of. I really like that. So yeah, so this is the project I was talking about, private commission of a woman near Boston. She commissioned me to make, I think it was 35 plants, all to do with the language of flowers. So these were from the Victorian tradition of how each plant would tell something when you gave it as a gift, it would give, there was meaning attached. So all these plants have meaning attached, and it was a whole exhibit. And this was such a fun project. And most of them were growing in my garden, so I was able to use my own plants for reference too. I love doing that project. Here's another slightly more recent one. These are full-size plants, so they're about 24 inches tall. It was a whole meadow of wildflowers that I did for a place called Y Marsh here in Ontario. It's a nature area up in Aurelia, near Aurelia. And it's a beautiful place, but they wanted to have a diorama indoors in their sort of museum area to show what their wild plants are there. And so these are all plants that are native to me, and I'm sure they are to most of you as well. And that was a really cool project because I did each one as it was blooming outside, and really got me excited about native plants. So okay, and this was another project of aquatics that I did. This is a personal project as well, another exhibit where I chose plants that were all ones personal to me on my river, in my river. The poison ivy, I'm extremely allergic to it, so that had to go in there. And all these other ones, the ones that I see in my kayak rides and my time on the river. So that was a really meaningful project to me personally. And since I have sold a lot of these as well, which is kind of cool. Okay, this project was done 3 years ago, I believe, for a place called Grow Wild, which is in Montana. It was a really fun project. They are wildflowers that are, some are native, some are non-native, and super invasive, awful plants. What the project is for is actually a trailer that this organization brings around to farmers markets and different events. She has them mounted differently than this, but they're in sort of a glassed in area at the back of the trailer, and she's using them to educate about those plants. So this was a project specifically designed to educate about invasive plants. So I thought it was really interesting, and a lot of these were unfamiliar to me because they're from Montana. So I thought that was kind of fun too, to work with plants. Although the invasive ones are familiar to me, of course, but then the native plants were not. And so I had a lot of fun. These were also very tall. I think the hollyhock is probably 36 inches tall or something. So really fun to capture the whole plant. Okay, here's another educational piece, which actually I made as a private commission for someone whose husband had just graduated from forestry school, and she wanted to, make a gift to him to congratulate him. And this was all of the plants that were, trees that were native to her area, which is Southern Ontario. So we don't have all of these here where I live, but most of them we do, and I was able to use them. I love making leaves. It's one of my favorite things. So I just wanted to show you this one because this is something you could maybe try if you're working in an educational setting yourself. It could be a fun workshop, or maybe with children, getting leaves, tracing them, and painting them. It's a good way to teach about leaf shape, but also in 3 dimensions, it kind of gives you more, it's a little bit more accessible. And that's something I've found with making paper plants in general, is that the 3 dimensions really add something that a photograph doesn't. So, okay. So now I'm going to talk a little bit about my actual aquatics project. Here are the first few. I guess it was almost 2 years ago now. I was asked by University of Minnesota to create some submerged aquatics. The woman who contacted me had seen some of my work for Grow Wild and wanted to challenge me to see if I could I do it? Could I make these and they're very, very fine and very complicated. And I thought that was fun and a cool challenge. And I had been sort of making more and more detailed cosmos leaves or nigella, things that were really fine. So I wanted to take the challenge on. So the first two I made for her are on the right. It was the Eurasian water milfoil and the water marigold. And so I guess I passed the test because they came out great. I was so pleased, and I was able to create a working method around that. So these are the first ones. I'll show you here. This is how she asked me to present them with tags that are removable. So it's another idea. She uses them in her aquatic invasive species detectors program. And so it actually is training people to identify these plants in the wild to eradicate them. In some cases, although this one is native. So anyways, it's for identification training. So the tags are actually removable. You can take them out for the test part and put them back in, when, anyways. I also wrote the names on the back, so there would be no confusion, but just wanted to show you that that's another option for how to make that work. These plants are all aquatics, although not all submerged aquatics. Some are floating at the top there. These were made for Rice Creek, which is also in Minnesota. Very similar presentation and some similar plants. There's two invasive plants here. The curly leaf pondweed at the bottom right, and Eurasian water milfoil at the bottom left, but the rest are native plants. This was really fun. I really, really loved making the water lily, especially. I love flowers, but I liked making this series, and I think it presents really well. They're also being used, at events and things to show, to teach a little bit. I've done projects for Invasive Species Center as well here in Ontario, and I'm working on some more right now. So they're going to use them in their displays. Here are the plants I made for Benzie Conservation District. I thought you might like to see them if you haven't seen them in person. They're all in big acrylic boxes. They're 16 by 20 inches. I made them quite tall. They're 12 or 13 inches tall, and each one has a detail as well. So that's another thing that helps with identification, is some pulling out a little detail that might show additional information, just like how you would have in a botanical illustration. So here's two of them, the starry stonewort and the musk grass. I'll explain a little more about the musk grass later. Okay, curly leaf pondweed and clasping leafed pondweed. That clasping leafed was actually a real challenge because the leaves reflex in two ways. So if I know some of you are paper flower making people, and you might understand that it's just really hard to make a leaf bend one way and another way, like cup and bend. It was a challenge that I enjoyed. And likewise, the curly leaf pondweed was a challenge because it's crinkled edges. So okay, here's the Eurasian water milfoil and the northern water milfoil. These are two that we have here in our lakes and rivers as well. So I've seen them lots of times now that I know how to identify them, and made them lots of times too. Okay, here's some water weeds. The common waterweed, of course. Brazilian waterweed is a terrible invasive plant, and so is the hydrilla, which I have more orders to make more hydrilla. I don't know if that's a good thing. It's not a good thing. I think it's becoming a problem. And here's the fanwort, which we also have at my husband's cottage. It's a real problem at the front of his cottage. So I was able to find fresh models to work from, and a coontail on the right. So this is also to show you how the box looks. I think it's beautiful. It's a really good choice. Total acrylic around 3 sides so that you can really see the 3 dimensions. Well, those are the pieces I did for Benzie Conservation. Okay, so thanks for listening so far. Bear with me. I'm going to talk about my process now. So, because I know it might be hard to conceive of how I make these things, but I'll share some of my secrets and how I do it. So here, this is to add a little color to our talk, me making peonies. So my process starts with research. I always take the time to figure out obviously what plant I'm doing. I need to know the scientific name. And if it's a commissioned piece, then there's a conversation there about what specific qualities the person wants me to show, because sometimes there are elements of the plant that are more important. So that's part of the research. And then I go through many, many photos and make drawings. And if I have access to the real plant, that's obviously the perfect resource. They don't always. Okay, and then I make designs and drawings. I make templates. I choose paper. I cut and shape the paper and color it. And then I assemble and finish. So I'm going to go through each part with some photos to show you how it goes. So this is the research stage. I love having photos like this, especially for the submerged aquatics. It's been super helpful to have photos that show size and scale, because then I can use them to directly create my own templates. So if whoever takes these photos, thank you. I'm sure that other people are looking at them as well. You don't even know who's using these pictures, but very, very, very helpful, especially the ones with the nickels. Our nickels are the same size as your nickels. So I was able to use my nickel and make a template. So yeah. Okay, here's just a couple of pages from my sketchbook from Northern Water Milfoil and Eurasian Water Milfoil. I just wanted to show you, it's a mess, but that's how I sort of conceive of how the parts that I need. I do this for flowers as well, but these were more complicated. They are more complicated, so I need to have sort of strict method. The numbers are all based on how many I had to make. So if it was 3, then I had to multiply everything out. So that's what that's all about. But I try to add as many details as I can, just so I can go back. And what's awesome is if I'm making it again now, I can use these same pages. It says something to me anyway. Okay, so here's templates. So once I have all that information in the photos, I make templates that I can use. So for these submerged aquatics, I actually created templates that I could trace from. So when it's a vascular plant, then the leaf it's an outline that I'm making for a template. But here, because they're so thin, it's this kind of template. And I trace it onto the paper for my cutting guide. And I paint everything afterwards so you don't see the pencil. So that's that step. Here's it after it's been cut. So I use tiny, tiny scissors. You can see them in this previous page. Little scissors for this, and lots of patience. One at a time. I just go through and cut them all. It's a lot of work, but it's meditative, and I find quite relaxing if I'm in the right mood. Yeah, so that's part of it. And then I'll paint each one individually. This is also an opportunity for me to add details. So sometimes the central rib is a different color, or the thing is shiny. I can add a gloss medium to it. Or sometimes the tips are darker, so I will do that at this stage now. I'm holding it with a clothespin because I don't want to get paint on my hands, but I still got paint on my hands. So after they're all painted, they're dried, then I assemble everything onto the stems. I usually work in pieces, even if I only have to do one. I'm only asked to do one, I'll do two, because it gives me a chance to work on something while the other one's drying, but also to kind of keep everything going. So here's this is the northern water milfoil, by the way. So here's the finished plants, and then there's the detail on the right, which is unfinished in this picture. But you can see I've painted the stems as well. And for this particular assembly, I actually bind each little tiny leaf onto the stem individually and then paint it. I don't know if you can see it in this process, but I've got a little bit of paper underneath each one to bind it on. Sometimes I just glue and there's no binding, and just it depends. I also want to point out that for these very fine leaves, I've created a rib. So each leaf is cut out, but it also has a little rib that holds that leaf more straight and strong. The paper I've used there is 2 layers of heavy drawing paper. It's quite strong already, but I found that the inflection point where it met the stem was weakening, especially if you moved it around. So I decided to add a rib onto each one. So that's what I did there. Here's another example. The bladderwort, not an invasive one either, but I've also made a rib that's a little zigzagged rib on each one. So cut them all out, and then I made all these tiny little bladders and stuck them on each one. I just really like the visuals on this. And then the first time that I saw a bladderwort after making these, it was a very exciting moment because I was able to identify it from my own work, which was really fun. So, I wanted to mention about the paint that it's acrylic paint in this case, although sometimes I do use colored paper that's colored already, and sometimes I use watercolor paint. The reason I paint it after I cut it is because the paper is thick. So if I paint everything green and then cut, there will be a little white line at the edge of every single one, and I have to go through and repaint anyway, so I might as well just paint at the end. All these are sort of trial and error things. Okay, here's me making hydrilla. If you're familiar with that plant, you know that it has these tiny spurs on the underside of each leaf that need to be shown, because that's part of the identification. So I devised this method of, it's complicated, but where I made the tiny star shapes, glued them on to another paper, and then cut along each one to make the tiny spur. So I think it worked out well. And I'm going to be making lots more, like I said, so I have to revisit this process, but I think it's a good one. On the right, I'm making chara, and just one of the species that I wanted to show you, because here I'm assembling it onto the stem. Each piece was kind of a whorl of pointed leaves. And then afterwards, so here's another picture of the chara. Once I assembled it all, I painted it with paint mixed with sawdust to give a texture, because it's actually kind of bumpy textured. So that was my solution to that. And here on the left, you can see how I sort of organize all my things. So once I've cut it all out, I have to keep it all separated and organized. So I have them all in little Ziploc bags so that I can keep it organized. Okay, so that's a little bit about my process. If you have more questions, you can put it in the chat and I can try and answer a little bit later. I just wanted to put this in there because maybe you're thinking about using these kinds of things in your work. Why would you use plant models? I think that they're great educational tools. A 3-dimensional model is great. We know that from animals, like a diorama with animals is so engaging and interesting, and it's the same with plants. So they're versatile, so you can use them as, you know, standalone pieces. You can mount them on something. You can use them in combination with animals, pollinators, whatever. I think that that's a selling point for them. And oftentimes real plants are not available, especially with the submerged aquatics. Then if you're trying to run a workshop or teach about them, having them physically available is expensive and difficult. So using the paper models helps. And then the 3 dimensions, I spoke about this before. The 3 dimensions add realism to, I think, what could otherwise be a botanical illustration. So why paper? I love paper. I'm a paper artist. That's why. No, it's cheap. It's easily available. You can get it anywhere. So if you're trying to make them yourself, you know, it's really accessible. And if you make a mistake, it's not a big deal. It's not like 3D printing or plastic molds or even using other materials like metals. It can be really expensive. So I find paper to be super easy to work with in that way. It's lightweight, awesome for shipping, also awesome for moving them around. Transportation, they're easily repaired. So if a leaf falls off, you can just get glue and put it back on, and super versatile. So paper can be, there's so many types of paper, there's so many thicknesses, there's so many ways to color it. I find the possibilities are endless. And also I think leaves and flowers really look like paper. There's sort of a easy connection there. Okay, so here I'm going to talk a little bit about the materials that I use. Just quickly, someone asked about paper. I'll show you in a minute, but I usually use crepe paper for flowers, for petals, heavy drawing paper for my leaves. For these submerged aquatics, certainly use heavy drawing paper. But I also use recycled paper. It's great. It's acid-free. Packing paper is awesome. I use paper towel quite frequently to bulk the stems out if they have to be thicker. It's super handy and accessible. So those are some of the kinds. Lately, I've been working with Japanese paper a lot, which has been really fun. It's beautiful and there's no grain to it, so it can be used in places that other paper can't. So glue, here are my glues, well used. Weld Bond, that's one of my favorites. It's a new favorite. Super easy to glue, glues quickly, and it's a real permanent bond. Just regular school glue, of course, and Mod Podge to make things glossy. Paint, acrylic, I've got ink. I use sometimes pan pastels, which are, it's like a pastel, but you can brush it on with a brush. So those are some different ones. And then wire. So for wire, I usually just use a heavy garden wire for the stem, and then some florist wire for the other elements. These submerged aquatics don't have a lot of wire because they were too fine to make out of wire. Here's some of my tools. Scissors. I have a million pairs of all different kinds. I'm always buying more because they get dull or they break. I do a lot of shaping and scoring of things. So for leaves especially, you need tools to do that. So I use a foam mat and I use those tools to shape. And here's some of my cutting tools. Tweezers, definitely. For these submerged aquatics, I had to use tweezers a lot. And pliers, of course, to cut the wire and to bend things. Okay, and so here's a water chestnut that I made just to kind of finish off that talk. I'm going to stop sharing and show you a few things that I have here in 3 dimensions because I thought you might like to see them before we answer the questions. So I'm going to do that now. And so I just want to show you a few things. There's one of so here's and submerged aquatic. This was clasping leaf pondweed. I wanted to show it to you because this was one that I didn't find was successful. So I ended up keeping it and not using it in the box. I made this for you, Kyla, but yeah, didn't end up using it. I just wanted to show that it is actually three-dimensional. Even if I melt them in boxes, the backs are done as well. Here's one of my templates just to show you how I do that fanwort. And here's one of the little wee tiny, that's how big they are, each one. So I keep these, here's a little bag for my Brazilian waterweed. I keep them in little bags and I just keep all my information there so that next time I go to make this, I'll know how it is. My current project right now is making asters. So here's a New England aster, lots of little parts. I just wanted to show you how it's actually three-dimensional, even though it sits flat. Here's the peony that I showed you the process of. Let's see if I can show it well. So I want to also with this just show you how, the color's not great, but anyway, just how strong they actually are. They're very, you can really sort of play, and the leaves are posable, so they're fully wired here, and this is wired, so the whole thing can be posed how you want it to be. Agapanthus that I made, lots of little pieces. Again, sorry, my camera's not capturing a good color, but I just wanted to show that off. And then lastly, a trillium. Here's another one where, okay, well, the color doesn't want to. It has reflexed petals and that was quite complicated, but anyway. Yeah, so those are them, my little bouquet. Okay, I'm done showing. The other thing I wanted to share was the paper that I use. So here's my mixed media. It's 160 gram. This one is made by Fabriano, which is an Italian company. So that's what I've used to make all of those submerged aquatics. Yeah, so, okay. Now I would like to spend some time answering your questions.
Oh my gosh, thank you, Linda. That was incredible. There's a lot of questions in the chat, but I will also invite people to unmute themselves if you'd like to ask your question to Linda directly. And then if there's like too long of a pause of silence, I'll start reading questions from the chat.
I do have a question. You can hear me.
Yeah, we can hear you.
As a Lake Association member of a lake in Maine I grew up on, we are starting to identify weeds. And yes, Eurasian milfoil is one of the issues. It's very hard to teach people what you're looking for if you have a drawing, flat drawing, and then you're going around in the lake and you're trying to look in water to do this. I'm very interested in this. They were trying to come up with a way to better educate folks on this. There's a little bit of a learning curve to what you do, and I'm not sure I can accomplish that in short order. I mean, are these where we could request to purchase them, and will there be any information on that? Because I think this would be wonderful.
Yeah, I mean, I'm sort of booked up now for a little while, but I certainly welcome questions about if you'd like to purchase them, and also if you'd like to try making them yourself, because I think that is part of what my goal here is to get people to more and more people to try this themselves too. There is a learning curve. I would say maybe doing something on a larger scale might be easier at the start. Creating a larger scale model might work. I'll just say that when I started making those submerged aquatics, and then the first few times that I was in my kayak and I saw the plant in the water and I could identify it, it was so exciting. And I think it definitely was. I mean, I spend a lot more time with them, but having them in 3 dimensions and having them as a model really does help with educating, because I don't know if you would agree, Kyla, but is more accessible, I think. It was so fun that I was, oh my gosh, this is whatever, Van Mort or so. Yes, I welcome. I'll give you my web address and my email at the end. You're welcome to email me and we can continue that conversation. Or you can email Kyla and ask about her experience with, because she ordered these and she was actually quite involved in which plants I would make and how they were presented and stuff. So she knows that part of the process and whether they were helpful or how you're using them. So
definitely. And to everyone, I will include Linda's website and contact information in the follow-up email with the link to the recording of this presentation as well.
Thank you. And we can come down to Benzie Conservation District and see the ones that you've gotten.
Definitely. Everyone is welcome to stop by our office. I'd love to have you here and love to show off Linda's work.
Good. I look forward to that. I live here now.
Exciting.
Both places.
Wonderful. Please stop in anytime.
Thank you.
Other questions? In the chat then, someone asked, how long did it take to complete the Language of Flowers project?
Oh, I got the order in April and I was finished sort of mid-August, I would say. So it took me a while. I was working at that time. Now this is my full-time job. So it's a little bit different. I actually have 5 days a week that I can spend on this, but each plant usually takes me about a day. It's a hard one because I usually make more than one at a time. And if it's something I've made before, it can go quicker. But if I make a mistake, like with that clasping leafed pondweed, and it doesn't look the way I want it to, then I'm right back where I started from. So it's hard to say how long things take. But yeah, that Language of Flower 30 boxes, a lot of the work is also boxing them, like framing them and gluing them all in and things like that. So that I actually drove that project down there. I was so worried about it at the time, shipping it, that I drove it to Boston. So that actually added some time as well. So hope that answered your question.
These plants and arrangements are exquisite. Even though you create botanical accuracy, I think there must be details that you choose to leave out. How do you decide which botanical details are unnecessary to your interpretation?
I've been actually talking about this a lot because there definitely is a limit to how much you can show. And one example of that is like hair on stems. So sometimes it's really an identifying feature, but it can be hard to capture. I try and do it if I really need to, where I glue wool on the stem. But other times I try and capture it by just using white paint and dabbing it, or using a rougher paper so that it looks sort of woolly. So that's an example of trying to capture a certain detail, but not being able, like physically able to make each tiny hair. Of course not. So I choose it based on a lot of what I'm doing is based on sort of an overall personality of the plant, an overall look. And I try and include details, add to that, and don't worry about things that don't. It's lucky if I'm gluing it in that sometimes I can avoid doing things on the backs, that too much detail on the back. But like I said in my presentation, I also will consult with who I'm making the plant for to see what things they really need. They really need in there, and try and include those things. So
I also was impressed by your leaf display that you made for that one project. And someone asked, do you use paint to get the details of the veins and things, or are those like a three-dimensional part?
yeah, the veining is three-dimensional in that I score it in. So I'll do it when the paper is still wet. I use layers of paper and I'll score in the veining. I press really hard to also get the veining on the back. So I don't know, maybe I don't have an example here, but it also kind of changes the shape of the paper a little bit when you press really hard into it. So yeah, that's done in 3 dimensions. Sometimes it's wire. So for some of those plants, they actually have multiple wires embedded inside the leaf. For some of those leaves, I mean. But also I use paint on top. So
What was the most challenging plant you created and why?
oh, yeah, I think that curly leaf pondweed was really hard because of the way the leaves are crinkled, and I found it at the very end. I had assembled it all, and then I did another one last look through the details, and it said that each one was also toothed. So now I had to go back and cut tiny teeth in each crinkled leaf. It was just really insane. And then I got asked to make several more copies of it. And anyway, I think that maybe it was more of a mental challenge of why am I doing this? No, that one was really challenging. And then the hydrilla also is quite challenging because of multiple elements. Sometimes it's more about mood and attitude what makes something challenging, because you get in a space of not being able to finish it, or losing focus, and that can be hard too. So yeah.
The curly leaf pondweed, I can say when you look at it, it looks exactly how it looks out in the field. So you did a great job.
That's good. Thank you. Thank goodness.
Another comment, the accuracy is stunning. Thank you so much for sharing with us. Wondering about the paints, if you are able to find what you need or if you mix the paints for species-specific accuracy.
Oh, yeah, I mix them. I have a couple real, I should have brought them here, but I don't have I have a couple that I use as sort of a base color usually, where I'll paint it once in that it's like a leaf green or an olive green, or I use one called a hooker's green. I use those sort of as a base color, but then yes, I'll mix other colors in to make it more accurate. And some plants really are identifiable by their color, so it's important to have a good look. Although in aquatic plants, that was really hard because ones that are more submerged are then lighter because they have less chlorophyll, or maybe just are getting less light. And so when you're looking at photos, it's going to be really deceptive of how deep is this plant. And so that's a challenge. And I just try and do sort of a baseline of, okay, it's mostly blue, or it's mostly, and sometimes it's probably totally inaccurate if you put it next to the real plant, but I'm trying my best there.
There are a lot of other really nice comments and compliments in the chat, Linda, so I'll give you a chance afterwards so you can take a look at all of those. But I want to open up the floor for any other questions to be dropped in the chat, or if anyone else wants to unmute and ask your question to Linda directly. Okay.
Linda, I would like to just chime in and say how amazing I think your work is. It's beautiful. It's both art and biology. And I'm totally inspired by your work. I was an art major in undergraduate school and then went to grad school in biology. And so I love both art and biology, and I see it in your work. It's just absolutely beautiful. Thank you so much.
Oh, you're so welcome. Yeah, I'm just getting so excited about the idea of science and art coming together. I think it's not just me that feels that way, of course not. So
Yeah.
thank you for your comment. And I think it makes science accessible in a way that, and in fact, it makes art accessible to people who are maybe more interested in science. So
Yes.
yeah, that's neat. What a fun, I wish I had time to go back to school and do biology. I really, I'm trying my best to learn on my own, but there's lots of things I'd love to learn. So Yeah. Oh, neat. Thank you very much. I'm glad you like it.
Thank you so much.
Okay, I'm going to Kyla. I have my some resources here, and I think I'll just share my screen one more time to show. Nope, wrong one. Sorry. So I'm just going to show you. Oh, okay, so this is just a few references that I use, and I don't know if you're interested, but talking about science made me think I need to say my references. Anyways, Newcomb's Wildflower Guide, my very favorite thing of all time. I use it all the time, and I have 2 copies, and they're all full. It's all full of pressed plants inside. These are websites you might find interesting. Burkeherbarium.org is one I use all the time to find examples to work from. Plantillustrations.org is something another paper flower maker got me onto. Very, very useful for every plant is documented with multiple botanical illustrations. So oftentimes I find botanical illustrations better resources than photos, because that artist has also looked at it very carefully and thought about what they want to show. And so that's a great resource for both historical botanical illustrations and modern ones. Wildflower.org, of course, pressed plants, very useful, my own garden, and detailed notes, and then Google as a last resort. Okay, and then lastly, here's my website and my email, but I think Kyla's going to share that with you as well. So, oh, and this is something Kyla wanted me to share here.
Yeah, I guess to wrap up everything, I will make sure that everybody gets access to those resources and Linda's website and email address too, so you can follow up on her work. And I also recommend you follow her on social media. I'll put the information for that in my follow-up email as well, because she posts lots of updates about what she's working on. It's always very interesting. But yes, please save the date for our last webinar in our webinar series this winter. It's Didimo, How About Diddy Less? Collaboration and Citizen Science to Combat Rock Snot in Michigan. We'll be joined by Dr. Jordan Stoll from Trout Unlimited. That's on February 12th, and you can sign up on our website. So thank you everyone for joining us today, and I hope you have a wonderful rest of your day. Stay warm out there if you're in Michigan, and most of the country I feel like is pretty cold right now. So stay warm.
Thank you so much, everybody.